I thought the worst day of my life was when my husband packed his bags to find himself in a remote mountain cabin. I was completely wrong. The real nightmare began exactly 2 years later. He stood on the porch of my new luxury townhouse, clutching dead flowers and a marriage certificate bearing another woman's name. Dropping to his knees, he begged for his old life back, carrying dark secrets that would shatter everything I ever believed. Hello and welcome to the cherished audience of Violet Revenge Stories. Unfortunately, YouTube has disabled our monetization feature, leaving our channel without a budget to operate. If you find today's story engaging, please consider supporting us with just $1 so we can pay our staff for their living expenses and continue creating stories to serve you. You can donate by scanning the PayPal QR code on the screen or by clicking the PayPal link in the description or comments of this video. My name is Ivy Hall, and this is my story. It was a typical Tuesday evening in Seattle, the rain washing down the windows in relentless, heavy sheets, when Julian Vance, the man I had loved and trusted entirely, sat me down at our kitchen table. He did not look me in the eye. Instead, he stared intensely at his hands. His shoulders slumped as if carrying an invisible weight, and delivered the news that would completely fracture my reality. He told me he was suffocating. He claimed the crushing pressure of his corporate job had destroyed his mental health, and he desperately needed a sabbatical. He was not asking for a vacation of a few weeks, but an entire 6 months away from me, away from our home, and away from his normal life. He insisted he needed to isolate himself in a remote, rustic cabin in the mountains of Colorado to heal from his severe burnout. I remember the air leaving my lungs. My entire world seemed to stop spinning in that dimly lit kitchen. I was profoundly devastated. The thought of sleeping alone for half a year felt like a physical blow to my chest. Yet I forced myself to swallow my grief. I wanted to be the perfect, understanding wife. I genuinely believed my husband was suffering from a dark depression. So I set my own emotional needs completely aside. I spent the next 3 days carefully washing and folding his heavy winter clothes, packing his large duffel bags with thermalwear, hiking boots, and the thick woolen sweaters suited for the harsh mountain cold. I even went to the store and bought him extra survival gear, trusting his narrative without a single ounce of hesitation. I drove him to the airport, kissed him goodbye at the terminal, and promised I would take care of absolutely everything back in Seattle so he could focus entirely on finding himself again. Once he was gone, our spacious house transformed into a terrifyingly quiet void. Every footstep I took echoed against the cold hardwood floors, mocking my sudden solitude. The silence was deafening, acting like a heavy blanket that threatened to suffocate me every single night. During the day, however, I had absolutely no time to mourn his absence. I was a senior manager at Zenith Horizon Logistics, a highly demanding role that required absolute perfection and endless energy. I was shouldering immense pressure, managing massive supply chains, leading a large team, and dealing with high-stakes corporate negotiations. I was utterly exhausted, carrying the heavy burden of a grueling career and an empty, lonely marriage. But I kept pushing forward because I thought I was holding the fort for the man I deeply loved. 4 weeks into his supposed mountain retreat, my best friend Harper came over to check on me. We sat in the living room with large glasses of red wine, and I tried my best to put on a brave, cheerful face. But Harper has always possessed a sharp, analytical mind, and she immediately saw right through my fragile facade. As I talked about Julian and his need for space, she began pointing out the glaring inconsistencies in his story. She asked why a man living in a remote, isolated cabin with supposedly no cellular service was somehow still managing to rack up unusual charges on our joint credit card statements. She noticed highly ambiguous financial expenses, pointing out regular payments at high-end grocery stores, luxury fitness centers, and upscale cafes located right in the middle of a bustling city environment. Her logical questions planted a terrible, creeping seed of doubt in my mind. After Harper left, I could not sleep. A sickening feeling of pure dread twisted deeply in my stomach, driven by a desperate, sudden need for the truth. I walked into Julian's home office and began searching through his heavy wooden desk. I dug deep into the very bottom drawer, a place he rarely let me organize or clean, hidden beneath a thick stack of old tax returns and useless manuals. I found a neatly folded piece of white paper. It was a receipt. My hands shook violently as I unfolded it and read the printed details. It was a confirmed payment for a luxury apartment lease in Denver, signed and dated just days before he left me at the airport. The address belonged to a high-end residential tower, a place completely and utterly opposite to a rustic mountain cabin. In that exact moment, the supportive, naive wife inside me completely died. I did not fall to the floor. I did not shed a single tear of weakness or heartbreak. The crushing grief I had been carrying for a month instantly hardened into a cold, sharp, and terrifying anger. I looked at the crisp paper, realizing with absolute clarity that the man I had called my husband for 7 years was a stranger living a calculated double life, instead of crumbling under the massive weight of his betrayal. I made a silent, unbreakable vow in that dark office. I decided to cast aside my vulnerability and use every ounce of my intelligence to investigate the reality of his existence. He thought he could leave me behind and play me for a fool, but he had absolutely no idea what kind of war he had just started. The morning after I found that damning lease agreement, I did not call my husband. I did not scream into the phone, demanding answers about his fake mountain retreat. Confronting him would only give him the upper hand, allowing him precious time to spin a new web of lies, hire lawyers, and aggressively cover his tracks. Instead, I operated with a chilling efficiency that surprised even myself. I reached out to a contact in the corporate security sector and hired a highly discreet, ruthlessly thorough private investigator named Thomas Mercer. I met Thomas in a dimly lit coffee shop across town, sliding a thick manila folder across the table containing the Denver apartment receipt, Julian's recent joint bank statements, and every piece of identifying information I had on the man I married. I need to know exactly who is living at this address, where he spends his days, and who he spends his nights with, I told him, my voice steady, despite the intense adrenaline coursing through my veins. I want surveillance, financial sweeps, and a complete background check on anyone associated with him. Leave absolutely no stone unturned. Thomas simply nodded, securing the retainer of $10,000, and promised a preliminary report within 48 hours. Those next 2 days were a masterclass in psychological compartmentalization. I went to work at Zenith Horizon Logistics, led complex strategy meetings, and approved massive operational budgets, all while a devastating ticking time bomb sat right in the center of my personal life. When Thomas finally called me to a secure digital meeting, the truth he delivered was far worse than a simple midlife crisis or a brief, meaningless affair. He shared his screen, displaying high-resolution photographs taken outside a sleek, glass-fronted corporate building in downtown Denver. There was Julian, stepping out of a black town car, wearing a sharp, custom-tailored charcoal suit that I had never seen before. He looked robust, confident, and perfectly groomed, a stark contrast to the burned-out, exhausted man who had begged for a healing sabbatical. "Your husband is not resting in a remote cabin," Thomas explained calmly through the speakers. "He is currently the Director of Wealth Management at Apex Financial Partners, a highly lucrative firm based in Denver. He officially started the position 3 weeks ago, meaning he secured the job long before he left Seattle." Julian had fabricated an entire mental health crisis, just to relocate for a prestigious promotion without me knowing. The audacity was breathtaking, but it was merely the tip of a monstrous, destructive iceberg. Thomas clicked to the next slide, bringing up a series of candid photos taken outside the luxury residential tower listed on the lease I had found. Julian was not living alone. Clinging to his arm, laughing brightly as they walked a purebred golden retriever, was a stunning blonde woman. Her name was Sierra Sterling. Thomas had dug deep into her background, revealing she was the pampered daughter of a prominent real estate tycoon. Julian had apparently met her at a high-profile networking gala in Seattle 8 months prior, right around the exact time he started complaining about working late and feeling disconnected from our marriage. He had been carefully cultivating a relationship with a wealthy heiress right under my nose, playing the role of a highly successful, unattached executive. But the absolute climax of this horrific betrayal came when Thomas sent over a digitized public record pulled from Clark County, Nevada. I stared at the glowing monitor, my eyes tracing the official state seal and the stark black text. It was a certified marriage license, dated exactly 4 weeks before Julian packed his bags for his fake mountain retreat. He had taken Sierra on a quick, spontaneous weekend trip to Las Vegas, and they had legally tied the knot. My brain completely short-circuited as the reality crashed down upon me. Julian Vance was a bigamist. He was legally married to me in Washington State and legally married to Sierra Sterling in Nevada. He had committed a severe felony. The sheer scale of his deception forced my analytical mind to rapidly process his ultimate endgame. Why not simply ask me for a divorce? Why go through the exhaustive, risky charade of faking a sabbatical and committing a serious criminal offense? The answer was deeply hidden in our finances and his inherent greed. Julian knew that if he divorced me suddenly without cause, he would be subject to a grueling division of assets. I was the higher earner at Zenith Horizon, and my stock options were scheduled to vest in just 6 months. Furthermore, he needed to secure his new, elevated position with Sierra and her billionaire family before cleanly discarding me. I was nothing more than his financial safety net, a naive backup plan he intended to keep on the hook until the time was perfectly right to orchestrate an amicable split. He was undoubtedly aiming to walk away with half of my hard-earned wealth to fund his new elite lifestyle in Denver. The white-hot, blinding rage that had initially consumed my being began to crystallize into something entirely different. It turned into a frozen, calculating stillness. I did not shed a single tear over the loss of his love, because the devoted man I loved had never truly existed. He was a parasite, an opportunistic con artist who thought he had brilliantly outsmarted a woman he severely underestimated. Sitting in the quiet of my home office, staring at the irrefutable evidence of his double life, I made a silent, unbreakable pact with myself. I would not confront him yet. I would not give him the satisfaction of my anger or the advantage of knowing he had been caught. Instead, I was going to play his twisted game, but I would rewrite the entire rulebook. I needed precious time to legally protect my assets, secure my financial future, and lay a trap so devastating that he would never see it coming. He wanted to live 2 separate lives, and I was going to make absolutely sure he lost both of them in the most spectacular, ruinous way possible. The mourning period was officially over. It was time to go to war. The very next morning, armed with Thomas Mercer's explosive dossier, I walked into the sleek glass-paneled offices of Marcus Thorne. Marcus was not the kind of family law attorney you hired to negotiate an amicable split. He was the legal equivalent of a tactical nuclear strike, famous in Seattle for systematically destroying unfaithful spouses in the courtroom. I sat across from his massive oak desk, handed him the thick file containing the bigamy evidence, and watched his cold, calculating eyes scan the documents. When he finally looked up, a sharp, predatory smile touched the corners of his mouth. "Your husband has handed us a loaded weapon," Marcus said smoothly, tapping his expensive pen against the Nevada marriage certificate. "Now, we just need to secure your vault before we pull the trigger." Under Marcus's ruthless guidance, I began a stealthy and flawless financial extraction. My primary goal was to completely lock down every single cent of my hard-earned wealth before Julian even sensed a shift in the wind. Over the course of 14 days, I meticulously transferred hundreds of thousands of dollars in personal savings, high-yield tech stocks, and lucrative mutual funds into a highly secure, irrevocable trust. Because the funds were tied to assets I held prior to the marriage and corporate bonuses strictly in my name. Marcus found the exact legal loopholes to isolate them completely. I restructured my direct deposits, opened new banking channels at an entirely different institution, and quietly changed the beneficiaries on my life insurance and retirement accounts. By the time I was finished, the joint accounts we shared held exactly enough to cover basic utility bills, while my true net worth was safely hidden behind an impenetrable fortress of legal paperwork. With my financial future completely secure, I took the boiling, toxic anger that threatened to consume me and channeled it entirely into my career. I stopped being the exhausted, accommodating wife and transformed into a relentless corporate machine. Zenith Horizon Logistics was fiercely competing for a massive, multinational supply chain contract, a deal that had been stalled for almost 9 months. I took absolute control of the pitch. I worked 80-hour weeks, analyzing complex logistical routes, cutting operational waste by 25%, and delivering a presentation so aggressive and flawless that the client signed the agreement on the spot. The ink was barely dry on the $50 million contract when the executive board called me into the top floor boardroom. They did not just give me a substantial bonus, they officially promoted me to regional director, granting me unprecedented authority and a staggering salary increase. I was thriving, climbing the corporate ladder with a fierce, unstoppable momentum. My internal transformation soon demanded an external reflection. I could no longer stand living in a space that felt like a shrine to a dead marriage. One weekend, I hired a local crew and systematically purged the house of everything Julian had ever loved. I sold his bulky, dark leather recliners, the depressing mahogany dining set, and the hideous abstract paintings he insisted on hanging in the hallway. I donated his old golf clubs and cleared out his side of the custom closet entirely. In their place, I brought in brilliant light, breathing vibrant life back into the rooms. I bought plush cream sofas, lush indoor plants, and delicate modern art pieces. I turned his former home office into a beautiful, sunlit personal library. The house was no longer a silent tomb waiting for an absent master. It was my sanctuary, smelling of fresh lilies and new beginnings. Amidst this intense period of personal rebirth, Julian still had the sheer audacity to call me. Every 2 weeks, my phone would light up with his name, and I would have to prepare myself for the ultimate acting performance. I would sit on my new cream sofa, press a high-fidelity external recording device to the speaker, and answer with the softest, most sympathetic voice I could muster. "Hi, darling," Julian would say, his voice dripping with fake exhaustion. "The mountain air is really helping, but my therapist thinks I need to stay disconnected for just a little while longer. It is so isolating up here, but I am doing the deep work." I would listen to the faint sounds of Denver city traffic bleeding through his microphone and smile coldly to myself. "Take all the time you need, Julian," I would reply, forcing a gentle, supportive warmth into my tone. "I am managing everything perfectly here in Seattle. Just focus on healing your mind." He would sigh heavily, completely convinced of his own brilliance, unaware that every single lie, every fabricated detail about his fake therapeutic journey was being recorded, time-stamped, and safely archived. He thought he was successfully keeping me docile and waiting. He did not realize he was simply handing me the exact ammunition I needed to bury him under the full, crushing weight of the law. I was no longer the victim of his story. I was the architect of his absolute ruin, and I was building his trap with his own words. The doorbell rang at exactly 7 o'clock on a chilly Thursday evening. I was not expecting company. I set down my glass of wine, walked across my newly decorated living room, and opened the heavy front door. There, standing on my porch, under the harsh yellow glow of the security light, was Julian. He was a complete physical wreck, an unrecognizable shadow of the polished executive I had seen in those surveillance photographs just a few months prior. His designer clothes were replaced by a wrinkled, stained flannel shirt and faded jeans. The expensive silver watch he always wore was missing from his wrist, likely pawned for gas money. His face was unshaven, his eyes were bloodshot with heavy, dark bags underneath, and his expensive leather shoes were completely scuffed and covered in mud. He looked entirely defeated, a man who had been thoroughly crushed by the weight of the world. Before I could even utter a single syllable, he collapsed against the doorframe, burying his face in his hands as loud, dramatic sobs tore through his chest. "Ivy," he choked out, his voice cracking with manufactured anguish. "I am so incredibly sorry. I was a complete fool. The time away, the distance, it was a massive, stupid mistake. I thought I needed to find myself, but all I found was how utterly lost I am without you." He looked up at me, his eyes pleading, thick tears streaming down his face in a performance worthy of a cinematic award. He reached out, desperately trying to grab my hand, begging me to let him come back home and start our life over from scratch. I stood perfectly still, my hands resting calmly at my sides. I did not pull away, nor did I reach out to comfort him. I simply watched him perform. The irony of the situation was almost intoxicating because I knew exactly what had driven him back to my doorstep. He was not here because of some spiritual awakening in the mountains. He was here because his golden ticket had spontaneously combusted. Just 48 hours earlier, Harper had called me with the final, spectacular piece of the puzzle. Through her extensive network of corporate contacts, she had discovered that Sierra Sterling's billionaire father had decided to run a comprehensive, top-tier background check on his new son-in-law before purchasing a massive estate for the newlyweds. The tycoon's private investigators had easily unearthed the truth that Julian was a bigamist. The fallout was instantaneous and utterly catastrophic. The Sterling family did not just quietly annul the marriage, they aggressively destroyed his entire existence in Denver. In a matter of hours, Julian was violently stripped of his prestigious position at the financial firm, locked out of his luxury apartment, and cut off from every single cent of the Sterling fortune. The family security team had physically repossessed his luxury car, canceled all of his credit cards, and threatened him with severe criminal charges if he ever contacted Sierra again. He was left with absolutely zero financial assets, heavily blacklisted in the corporate sector, and facing the terrifying threat of a massive lawsuit from one of the most powerful families in Nevada. He was drowning, completely penniless, and he had come crawling back to Seattle to use me as his final, desperate financial lifeline, completely oblivious to the fact that I knew his darkest secrets. Julian continued his pathetic monologue. He stared deeply into my eyes, weaving a masterful, emotional tale about his fabricated time in the wilderness. The isolation on the mountain broke me down. "Ivy," he whispered, his voice dripping with fake sincerity. Sitting alone in that rustic cabin for over 150 days, surrounded by nothing but absolute silence, I realized the true value of family. I spent hours chopping wood, hiking through the snow, and just thinking about our wedding day. I realized that my career stress had blinded me to the only thing that actually matters, which is you. I am completely healed now. I am ready to be the devoted husband you truly deserve. Every single word exiting his mouth was a calculated, toxic lie designed to manipulate my empathy and secure his access to my bank accounts. He expected me to cry, to throw my arms around his neck, and to welcome him back into my warm, comfortable life with open arms. He assumed I was still the naive, exhausted woman he had left behind. Instead of giving him the emotional validation he so desperately craved, I felt a cold, brilliant smile spread across my face. It was the smile of a predator who had just watched its prey willingly walk directly into a steel cage. I took a deliberate step back, opening the door wider, inviting the cold evening breeze into the hallway. "Julian," I said softly, ensuring my voice sounded perfectly gentle and welcoming. "You look absolutely freezing, and you must be exhausted from your incredibly long journey down from the mountains." I gestured toward the warmly lit dining room, where the scent of a rich, home-cooked meal lingered in the air. "I just finished cooking dinner. Please, come inside. Sit down at the table. We have so much to catch up on, and I think a hot meal is exactly what you need right now." He exhaled a massive sigh of relief, a triumphant glint flashing briefly in his tired eyes as he stepped over the threshold, completely unaware that he had just walked right into his own execution. The final net was securely in place, and the fateful confrontation was about to begin. I guided Julian into the dining room, where the warm glow of the chandelier illuminated a lavish feast I had meticulously prepared earlier that evening. The table was set with pristine white linen, sparkling crystal glasses, and silver cutlery. I served him a thick, perfectly seared filet mignon, roasted asparagus, and garlic mashed potatoes. I poured him a generous glass of a deep, robust Cabernet Sauvignon. He fell into the dining chair like a starving animal and immediately began to devour the food, practically choking on the meat in his desperate hunger. Between large, hurried bites, he continued his pathetic performance, complimenting my cooking and repeatedly declaring how foolish he had been to ever leave this warm, beautiful home. I sat quietly at the opposite end of the long mahogany table, my own plate completely empty. I simply rested my hands in my lap and watched him eat, observing the desperate, greedy way he consumed everything in front of him. He was a hollow shell of a man, running entirely on empty survival instincts. When he was exactly halfway through his steak, he finally paused, wiping grease from his unshaven chin with a cloth napkin, and looked at me with what he probably thought was a charming, boyish smile. That was the exact moment I decided to spring the trap. Reaching down to the chair beside me, I picked up a thick, unmarked manila folder and slid it slowly across the smooth, polished wood of the table. It came to a stop right next to his half-empty wineglass. Julian frowned, his thick eyebrows knitting together in genuine confusion. He looked at the folder, then back up at me, asking what it was. I did not say a single word. I simply gestured with my chin for him to open it. Julian wiped his hands on his jeans and flipped open the heavy cover. Inside rested a flawless, high-resolution color copy of the official marriage certificate from Clark County, Nevada. The document proudly displayed his legal signature right next to the elegant handwriting of Sierra Sterling. It took his exhausted brain exactly 3 seconds to process the bold black text and the official state seal. I watched with absolute, unadulterated fascination as the warm color violently drained from his face, leaving his skin an ashen, sickly gray. The remaining piece of steak fell from his fork, hitting his porcelain plate with a sharp, echoing clatter. His jaw dropped slightly, and his chest began to heave as genuine, uncalculated panic completely hijacked his nervous system. "Where did you get this?" he whispered, his voice trembling so violently he could barely form the words. But before I could answer, his survival instinct kicked in, and he immediately resorted to the only defense mechanism he knew. He began to aggressively gaslight me. He stood up, knocking his heavy chair backward, and started pacing around the room, waving his hands frantically. "You do not understand," he shouted, his tone shifting from panic to manufactured outrage. "She trapped me. I was in a terrible mental state. I was severely depressed, burned out from work, and completely vulnerable. Sierra preyed on my weakness. Her family has terrifying money, and they forced me into this paper marriage to secure a business deal. I never loved her. I was completely manipulated into signing that document while I was heavily medicated." The sheer audacity of his lies was almost poetic. I picked up my wineglass, took a slow, deliberate sip of the dark red liquid, and let his frantic voice bounce harmlessly off the walls of my sanctuary. When he finally ran out of breath, I set my glass down with a soft click. "You look utterly ridiculous," I stated, my voice as cold and sharp as a scalpel. "You were not drugged, and you were certainly not coerced. You lived in a luxury high-rise apartment in Denver. You were the director of wealth management at Apex Financial Partners. You played the role of a wealthy, unattached bachelor to secure a billionaire heiress, intending to keep me waiting in the wings until you could safely drain my accounts. I know absolutely everything." Julian froze completely, his eyes wide with stark terror. "I filed for a contested divorce early this morning," I continued, speaking with a slow, rhythmic cadence to ensure every single word pierced his inflated ego. "My attorney submitted an extensive dossier of evidence to the state court, formally charging you with severe marital misconduct, adultery, and deliberate financial fraud. The authorities are fully aware of your bigamy. You cannot do this to me, he screamed, his voice cracking with a mix of fury and sheer desperation. He grabbed his phone from his pocket, his fingers shaking wildly as he opened his banking application. I need money. I have debts. Sierra and her family completely ruined me. I am going to transfer my half of our savings right now and hire a defense attorney. A low, genuine laugh escaped my throat. Go ahead and try, I challenged him smoothly. My lawyer, Marcus Thorne, legally froze every single one of our joint financial accounts 3 whole months ago. We secured a preemptive court order based on your criminal activity. The balance in your application is an illusion. You cannot withdraw a single cent. You cannot transfer any funds, and your credit is completely obliterated. You are entirely bankrupt. Realizing he was completely cornered and financially castrated, the pathetic, apologetic husband vanished instantly. The mask slipped completely, revealing the vicious, greedy parasite underneath. His face contorted in a mask of pure hatred. He slammed his fists down on the dining table, rattling the expensive crystal. You vicious bitch! He roared, spit flying from his lips. You think you can just throw me away? I am legally entitled to 50% of this entire estate. I will take half of this expensive house. I will take half of that massive promotion bonus you just got from Zenith Horizon Logistics. I will drag this miserable divorce out for 5 whole years until you are completely bled dry. I stood up slowly, towering over him with an aura of absolute authority. I walked over to the hallway closet, pulled out a large, heavy black trash bag, and dragged it back into the dining room. I dropped it heavily onto the floor right at his muddy feet. It was filled to the brim with the cheap, discarded flannel shirts and worn-out shoes he had foolishly left behind when he abandoned me. Get out of my house, I commanded, my voice echoing with terrifying finality. Your things are in this garbage bag, exactly where they belong. You have no money, no leverage, and no home. I grabbed him firmly by the collar of his stained shirt and forcefully shoved him toward the front door. He stumbled wildly, cursing and swinging his arms, but he was too weak and exhausted to fight back. I flung the heavy front door wide open, revealing the freezing torrential rain pouring down onto the dark street. With one final powerful shove, I pushed him out onto the wet concrete porch and threw the heavy garbage bag out right after him. I will see you in court, I said coldly, and then I slammed the heavy door shut, locking the deadbolt with a loud, satisfying click, leaving him entirely alone in the freezing, dark storm. Despite being locked out in the freezing rain with nothing but a trash bag of cheap clothes, Julian somehow managed to find a desperate, bottom-feeding attorney willing to take his case on contingency. For the next 3 excruciating months, this miserable lawyer tried to bury my legal team under a massive mountain of frivolous motions and aggressive threats. They demanded exactly 50% of my Zenith Horizon Logistics stock, half the total equity in the Seattle townhouse, and even had the absolute audacity to claim permanent spousal support. They argued that my high corporate salary made me entirely responsible for his current destitute state. It was a pathetic, transparent attempt to bleed me dry through endless legal fees and force a desperate financial settlement. The ultimate turning point finally arrived on a crisp Tuesday morning during our first formal legal deposition. We sat in a stark, freezing cold conference room on the 40th floor of Marcus Thorne's towering office building. Julian sat across the long, polished wooden table, wearing a cheap, ill-fitting gray suit, desperately trying to look arrogant and completely in control. His sleazy lawyer was aggressively rambling about equitable distribution and the absolute sanctity of shared marital assets. I remained perfectly silent, resting my hands calmly in my lap, simply waiting for the executioner to drop the heavy axe. Marcus let them speak for exactly 20 full minutes before he slowly and methodically opened his thick black leather briefcase. Marcus pulled out a thick stack of certified banking documents and a sealed forensic handwriting analysis report. Mr. Vance, Marcus began, his voice dangerously soft and cutting through the quiet room like a razor blade. Could you please explain this personal loan application from exactly 8 months ago? The one approved for a staggering $250,000? Julian scoffed loudly, leaning back in his heavy chair and crossing his arms defensively. I took out a personal loan to cover our shared living expenses while she was too busy working. It is simply shared marital debt. That is incredibly fascinating, Marcus replied smoothly, sliding the heavy document directly across the table. Because this massive loan was heavily secured against my client's personal retirement portfolio without her knowledge. Furthermore, the banking records show the funds were wired directly to a luxury event planner in Las Vegas to pay for a very extravagant wedding reception with Sierra Sterling. But the most interesting part of this entire document is the signature at the very bottom. The independent forensic expert confirmed yesterday that the signature belonging to Ivy Hall is a complete, deliberate forgery. The smug, arrogant smirk was instantly and violently wiped from Julian's face. The warm blood drained completely from his cheeks, leaving him looking like a terrified, cornered animal. His aggressive lawyer suddenly stopped talking mid-sentence and violently pulled the document toward himself, his eyes widening in sheer, unadulterated panic as he read the undeniable proof. Committing blatant forgery of a major financial document to secure a massive bank loan, combined with the standing charge of felony bigamy, elevated Julian's situation from a messy civil dispute into a multi-count federal crime. If you do not sign a full, unconditional surrender right here and right now, Marcus stated clearly, looking directly into Julian's terrified, wide eyes, I will hand this entire dossier over to the district attorney before we even go to lunch. You will trade this expensive conference room for a state penitentiary cell by dinner time. He broke completely and utterly. The arrogant, manipulative man who had tried to play me for an absolute fool was instantly reduced to a shaking, hyperventilating mess. His own lawyer leaned over and aggressively whispered that he needed to surrender immediately or face total destruction. With a violently trembling hand, Julian signed the comprehensive divorce decree. He completely surrendered every single claim to the Seattle townhouse, my corporate bonuses, my retirement funds, and any future spousal support. He walked out of that skyscraper with absolutely nothing to his name. He was permanently blacklisted from the entire financial industry, facing impending criminal fraud charges from the furious Sterling family down in Nevada, and entirely bankrupt. The exact moment the state judge officially finalized the legal paperwork, I felt an incredibly heavy, suffocating chain snap right off my chest. I did not want to stay in a house tainted by his dark memory. No matter how much I had successfully redecorated it, I put the property on the housing market and sold it for a record high price within exactly 2 weeks. I took that massive financial profit and bought a breathtaking, massive penthouse right in the heart of downtown Seattle. The beautiful new apartment features massive floor-to-ceiling glass windows that flood every single room with brilliant, golden morning sunlight. Standing on my new private balcony, looking out over the glittering city skyline with a crystal glass of expensive champagne in my hand, I finally breathed a deep sigh of true, absolute freedom. The dark nightmare was completely over, and my beautiful, unwritten future was entirely mine to command. Hello, everyone, and thank you so incredibly much from the bottom of my heart for listening to my story today. Where are you tuning in from right now? Please let me know in the comments below. If you found today's story engaging and satisfying, please consider helping our channel with just $1. You can scan the PayPal QR code on your screen or use the PayPal link in the video description or comments. Your generous support allows us to pay our hardworking staff, helping them feed their families and continuing to create even more amazing stories to serve you. Thank you again, and have a beautiful day.